do because it's here. Time for the autumn Eason must-reads as well, which we launched on Monday. Weirdly, including one of tonight's guest is also as part of this. To be fair, I'm looking at that. We've actually had 1, 2, 3. He will be the 4th of 8 guests, and it's only because I haven't tried hard enough for the rest of them. Must-reads launched on Monday. Myself and Sinead Moriarty, as usual, every season pick 8 books with our friends at Eason's and think that you should read them. The top ones at the top are all mine. The ones at the bottom are all Sinead's, although we did have a fight over Donal Ryan's Strange Flowers, and I lost, as per usual, so Sinead got that. 8 fine books that are well worth your time. And as I said, including a bunch of authors that have already been on Shelf Analysis during the series. If you want to find out more details about those, Eason's website is the place to go. Nice and simple. Just go to Eason's website and you'll find all the details for all of those books there as well. Now, I don't think there's much else. I'm anxious that these days I kind of keep the preamble as short as I possibly can because there's kind of a lot to be done this evening on the program. My guest tonight is somebody who, when I heard that this book was coming out, I immediately went, ooh. Primarily because I like his writing so much. You will probably know him from his writing in the Irish Times, particularly his writing on the subject of TV. He is one of the very, very, very few people who can make me snort while I'm sitting at my desk reading one of his columns. Takes a lot. Thus, I'm kind of thrilled tonight and slightly upset for him because I'll tell you about that in a minute. But welcome along to Shelf Analysis for the very first time, Patrick Freyne. Patrick Freyne, how are you? Hey, I mean, I got to unmute you. That was my fault. There you go. Wait. My fault entirely. Now you're here. There you go.
I'm very good. Thank you for having me on this excellent show.
Not at all. I'm thrilled to have you on because you are that person. I'm also terribly disappointed for you because this was supposed to be the launch night for your book. This was the actual big bang.
We were going to have a big party at some point, but this can be a virtual party. So
yeah, because they're
having a beer.
And look, chin. Yeah, let's do that before we go anywhere. Okay. To your health and to the health of your book.
Thank you.
First things first, before we go anywhere, I'm going to talk to you about the book, but we usually start by asking people about the last 6 months, about how lockdown has treated them personally and professionally, and this whole weird, strange, new alternate universe that we're all finding ourselves in. What's it been like for you?
It's been, I mean, it's a truism to say it's been strange, but it's been kind of really odd because at the start, because my day job is reporting for the Irish Times, I could take my mind off it by kind of, like, we were still going out to report, and a lot of the early features I did at the earlier part of the year were kind of about how other people were coping. So it was like following postmen around the place and, you know, bus drivers and talking to street cleaners, and that was really fascinating, and that kind of took my mind off it at that period. If anything, it's getting stranger now, you know. So like, even when they delayed the launch of my book because they had to, because it was meant to come out in May, that didn't feel too weird. It felt like, okay, that's reasonable enough. It's more now. It's strange. And even like, people say they had trouble reading. In the early part of the pandemic, I read loads. And then it's more recently, I feel slightly edgier.
You're the one, because I think you may be one of the very few people that I've talked to on this series who has said that they found no problem reading earlier and are having trouble reading it. It's flipped for almost everybody else I spoke to.
Yeah, so I think because the day job had me out there, there was a certain amount of, normality, weird, counterintuitive normality about it. And also, we might talk about this later, but I love short books anyway. So kind of short attention span stuff is my wheelhouse at the best of times. So I read lots of essays and short stories and dystopias, you know, and dystopias make a lot of sense now.
Yeah, dystopias weirdly are something that people are leaning into really, really hard.
That's literally realist fiction now.
Yeah,
dystopias.
Is there? I always think there's an element of, you're right, we'll talk about this when you talk about your books, but sometimes you go, well, at least someone else has it worse than me, and it's zombies.
Yeah, no, at least there's no zombies.
Yeah,
you know? We're not in an autocratic state yet. You can always think those things.
Tell me just maybe a little bit as well, because I was reading both your stuff at the time, and I was reading the work of other journalists. My job involved me going into RTE every day, but I was literally in, out, sit in the studio, do the job, come home. Yeah. I was fascinated about what it was like for the likes of yourself who were out there in a world that kind of was very 28 Days Later, attempting to kind of talk to people about what that was like?
Yeah, like I was in the city a number of times, kind of interviewing people about their jobs and how their jobs had changed, and it was eerie. Like and it's eerie is not a word that people use a lot, but almost everyone I spoke to, like I'd speak to somebody whose job was street cleaning, and I'd speak to somebody who worked in a factory, and they'd all say it's eerie. Eerie became a normal word to use. And there's that weird. I remember the first day I went in the middle of thick lockdown. I kind of went in and it was to talk to bus drivers, and I was on Dame Street, and there was a moment. Now there was like a 5-minute stretch when there was no traffic at all on Dame Street, and I was standing on Dame Street, and occasionally a bus would come around, or a delivery van or something, or a police car. But there was like this 5-minute stretch. I was standing on Dame Street and there was nothing, and I could hear birds song, and you don't hear. And one of the things, like one of the street cleaners was telling me, was that they were seeing all sorts of wildlife in places they'd never seen it before. Like they were seeing foxes in part of the city, so you don't see foxes. He said he saw an owl in the middle of town, just perched on a windowsill. So yeah, it was kind of odd. But then reporting such a strange thing. When you're out reporting, everything becomes odd anyway. Like there's this idea that I think it's the French or the Russian formalists had this notion that art was making strange. So it was making ordinary things strange, and reporting is about, like, everything you put into report suddenly becomes strange by dint of it going into a narrative. So there's something kind of weird. There's a weirdening that happens when you're doing reporting anyway. So that kind of masked it a little bit for me. But every now and again, you kind of step up and you kind of look around and you go, okay, no, this is beyond odd.
Yeah, and that hasn't really changed for me. I had a moment today where I looked around and went, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I think I was driving the car listening to a news bulletin, and it just overwhelmed me again. Right before we start talking about all that, because this is not why we're here. We're here for the good stuff and the happy stuff. The book was originally supposed to come out like so many books were earlier on, but now obviously it's managed to come out at a point where bookstores are back and reopen again. So maybe tell me a little bit about what's in the book, and tell me why write it in the first place. Tell me about where it comes from, and tell me about what tipped you to go, do you know what, maybe this is worth putting together.
So I have a convoluted explanation for this. Like, for a long time, I kind of loved, when I was younger, I loved things by people like, I love comic writing, like Douglas Adams and Sue Townsend. And I saw someone there going, is this episode 42?
Yeah.
I think I saw someone in the comments there going, it would have been amazing to get Douglas Adams.
It's episode 41. I lie. You're one off.
Okay.
42 is
We're one off. Okay.
Yeah.
42, you'll have to get the ghost of Douglas Adams. But I always loved funny writing, and I loved witty essayists like Nora Ephron and David Sedaris, and I love P.J. O'Rourke, and there's a book by Bill Drummond from the KLF, the K Foundation. Yeah. He has a book called 45 that I loved. He wrote that when he was 45, and I'm 45 now. And they're all kind of, they tend to be funny but thoughtful essayists. And I always thought I might write something like that. And I've been kind of writing short stories, and I started experimenting with essay writing on the side. It was kind of general extracurricular, non-Irish Times writing. But then in recent years, I was just really impressed by essay writing by Irish writers that I know a lot of them, like Rosita Boland and Sinead Gleeson and Emily Pine. And I just found their writing so beautiful and honest and thoughtful, and it went to deep places. And I realized I also wanted to do that. I wanted to kind of have my cake and eat it, and have my kind of funny stories and somehow blend it together. And I think I managed to do that. But it just made as I started writing then, it just made the process a lot more interesting. And then there's also the fact that because I haven't written about myself before, like most of my work has been either reporting or columns that are about culture, like funny columns, but columns about other things. That when I actually sat down to do this, and I sent early things to Brendan Barrington, who's my excellent editor, and Brendan said, just send me stuff as you get, as you've written it, just send it on. And I was kind of, so that was like permission. And I just, basically, I took 3 months off and I basically wrote a short story, then I wrote an essay, I wrote a short story, then I wrote an essay. Mm-hmm. And they were all kind of motivated by that wish to talk about personal things, write something entertaining, but also go somewhere deep, maybe in different essays, sometimes in the same essay. And at a certain point, Brendan said, I think there's a book here. And at that's when I got my old band brain from when I was in a band, got really interested in track listing the book. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then I started writing in terms of what are the gaps that haven't been written about. I remember when I was in a band with my friends Dara and Paul, there'd always be like, okay, we need a slow song for track 4 and we don't have one, or we need a heavy song here at the end. And I started writing essays to fit those gaps then to some degree, which made it feel like a project, and the tonal stuff, which I love from being in a band. How do you make this work is one thing, became the big kind of creative project then.
So essentially you're saying it's one giant mixtape.
It's, yeah, to some degree. Like I did want, somebody asked me recently why I didn't do like one big continuous narrative. And partly it's because I love essays and I loved those people I mentioned before. And I like the idea that you can dip in and out. But I also like the idea that it does work as a whole, that if you read it sequentially, you will get a payoff from stuff earlier in the book. It can work on its own, but you'll also see a reference to something that came earlier.
So I think it is one of those things that is desperately needed right now, in that if we can find stuff that will allow us to escape reality for a little while and have a chuckle while we're on public transport or while we're waiting for, you know, something to happen, or we're sitting at home of an evening. There's not a lot of that knocking around at the moment, and I think that's why this is probably the perfect time for this book at the moment. I've got a bunch of things I want to ask you. Do you know, weirdly, we could have a whole conversation about Bill Drummond and 45, which is just one of those lost, magnificent books.
Isn't it a great book? It's kind of interesting how there's been a kind of wave of brilliant essay writing recently. And a lot of what I've been thinking about since noticing that wave is all the stuff that kind of would have fit that book came before. Because books of essays were a weirder, more random thing in the past.
Did you read the KLF novel?
I didn't read the KLF novel. I read How to Make $1 Million. You know, you could get it online in the early days of the internet. Yeah. I remember printing it off in college, and like hundreds of pages. And it's like a book on how to have a hit record, which I loved. And one of the things I loved about it, which I also love about 45, is that they lose interest in writing the book around 3/4 of the way through, and it gets quite meta because they actually start saying, we're kind of getting bored now, so we're just going to speed through the next bit, and it just kind of peters out. It's like the end of the Holy Grail for Monty Python. It just stops at a certain point. So yeah, I love Bill Drummond, and I love that kind of. I love them because of their notions. You know?
Oh, I think, yeah, there's a whole conversation to be had about that. Right, hang on. Before we go over here, let me do this first of all. Grace Tierney says, Howie, yeah, shame we couldn't get Douglas Adams for episode 42. I think we are about 25 years to note 35. Jesus, years too late for that. Yeah. Jackie says, happy lunch night, Patrick. Your book is fantastic. The wonderful Sinead Gleason says, happy lunch night, Patrick. Your book is wonderful. It is tender and comic and speaks to us all. Praise the Lord, I got the numbers wrong. My beloved other half has just said Douglas Adams died in 2001. Okay, for a lifelong Douglas Adams fan not to realize it's only 19 years, I'm just going to opt out of the show, and you can do the rest of it yourself. It's fine. Okay, we're here for a reason. That is for you to show us some books that you will think people might like. I like the idea that you've themed them in to some extent. So, like, where do you want to start? Where are we going?
Well, we were just talking about essayists and stuff that I like, things that I should have read before to some degree. I'm largely looking at stuff I read during the pandemic. And back in March or April, I finally picked up Are You Somebody by Nuala Whelan. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned all those brilliant contemporary Irish essayists like Sinead and Emily and earlier. And I was kind of, and I'd loved that stuff. And then there was a new edition of this book with a foreword by Jim Caldwell, another amazing writer. And I picked it up and I couldn't believe how good it was and how all of the themes that are still being talked about are all in this. And I couldn't believe, like, this came out in the 90s. And it's also like a mark of how disconnected I was from Ireland and Irish issues in the 90s, that my brain was on like British and American counterculture to my shame. And I wasn't really focusing on these, like people like Nuala Whelan or Nell McCafferty, who were amazing pioneers and were being their own selves in a country that didn't want people in general, but definitely didn't want women to be their own self. And she writes about her family and the things that she had to put up with in her family life and in her professional life and in her personal life. And it's just a beautiful book. I kind of feel weirdly ashamed. I feel like writing a book of essays before I'd read this book feels like I didn't do my essay leaving cert and I did the exam without it. Or I didn't do the course and then I did the exam or something. Because there's like, it's kind of amazing. Like a lot of the things I loved in those other writers I mentioned, a lot of it's kind of here already well ahead of its time. And I think there's so many Irish figures, and she'd be one of them. Nuala would be one of them, who I kind of feel created the Ireland that we can be ourselves in now, and that people like young idiots like me took for granted with my notions about American punk music and other things back in the 90s when I was ignoring her.
Sure.
And that's, yeah, so that's probably all I can say. It kind of blew me away.
That's a fantastic suggestion, and I think that's come up a couple of times throughout the course of the series as well. So it's good to remind people about it as well. Okay, well, what else have you got? What's next?
I'm just looking around. I was talking about short books.
Please.
And I love Deborah Levy. How do you pronounce her name?
I interviewed her once and called her Levy, so I think I got away with it. Yeah.
I read this, but I've basically read a bunch of Deborah Levy stuff in a row, more or less. And I think I've read everything in one sitting. They're all quite short. I read, so this is The Man Who Saw Everything. The first one I read was The Cost of Living, which is her second memoir, which I think is fantastic. And it's also a very short book. And I bought it in Chapters in Town, came back, sat down in the sitting room, and read it in one sitting. And that's a memoir about she's kind of come out of a marriage. And it's like, what's amazing about it is nothing spectacular happens in it, but it's just so soulful and fluid. And there's something in her writing style that I can't put my finger on, which means that every time I read her books, I don't come out. I just kind of go in and then the book is finished. So like this is a great book too. And this is one of these, the Man Who Saw Everything is one of these books where there's like a part 2 that basically redoes or undoes everything that happens in the first half of the book. So in my section on short books, Deborah Levy is fantastic. I always go on about Muriel Spark recently. This is a new edition of Memento Mori. I think my favorite one of hers is The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, but because my shelves in this shelf analysis are really, really disorganized, I can't find books when I go looking for them. So this is one I have. This is about a bunch of older people towards the end of their lives getting kind of weird nuisance phone calls. Let's say, I'm trying to remember what the thing is. I'm going to read it.
You wouldn't be the first, really.
They basically get calls with somebody going, "You're going to die," right? And it's just like nothing is resolved. It's all these interconnected people, and her eye for the reason I'm going on about short books is her in particular. I kind of read her stuff and I go, a lesser writer would have taken 600 or 700 pages to do this.
Yeah.
And there's just something fantastic in how she has compressed things down, left what needs to be unsaid, doesn't state anything that doesn't need to be said explicitly, and just gets all the character detail out there. And she's kind of cold-eyed in a way that I kind of wonder sometimes if people have patience for anymore, but I still love, like, where you're going, because she is omniscient and she's no favorites in her characters. So horrible things can happen to anyone.
I think if people watched the series earlier, we had the joyful moment of Ian Rankin when I interviewed him for this, taking his phone out of the clip. He was doing it on his phone, and he said, "Come here," brought us into the room next door and said, "You see that table? That's the table Muriel Spark wrote The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie on." He'd bought it in an auction because he loved her work so much.
Yeah.
That was one of the stranger things we've had happen over the course of the
I don't own anything belonging to other writers. Except books I've borrowed, and they should probably forget.
Yeah, we've all got those. Okay, that sounds great. That's Muriel Spark, Memento Mori. Okay.
And then the last short book is Lanny by Max Porter, which I also absolutely loved. I loved his previous book, The Creeks and Thing of Feathers.
Yeah.
And I kind of like, I'm a kind of very middlebrow person. So what I love about this is it's experimental, and it's genuinely experimental in that there's all this strange text stuff that happens, but it is eminently readable. And the experiment mix, like all the experimental stuff, fits the mood of what's happening. And it's set in a small English kind of commuter town, and it's about one family, and it's about the little boy's genuinely sweet relationship with a local artist, an older man, and it's about a kind of potential tragedy in the town. And then there's this strange kind of Green Knight style god figure, or kind of old Celtic god, who's kind of watching the town and just observing things. And that's where all the strange kind of experimentally text stuff comes in. And I just loved it. And like Muriel Spark, I kind of feel like a less good, and I know he was an editor for a long time, Max Porter, and I kind of wonder if this is if it's just his editing chops coming in. I just feel like a lesser writer would have spent 500 pages getting the same effect.
Yep.
And it might have been a good book at 500 pages, but I really appreciate the fact that I can get this in 210 pages.
Yeah, I felt the same way about it. I think sometimes you do see books that are experimental in form, and you go, okay, I've got to brace myself for this. This is going to take a while. Lanny is not that book at all. And again, if people are interested, Max Porter was on the show a while back before the summer, and he talked very eloquently about that and about the books that he was recommending as well.
And he's excellent at selling books. I watched that episode and I was like, I think I'm going to buy all of them.
Yeah, he's absolutely still got those part of his skill set is still definitely there. Okay, what else have we got?
Those short books. Then my comfort genre, so I go back to it, particularly in the pandemic, is sci-fi, fantasy.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. and I like it all. Like I kind of like I really so there's the kind of literary edge of it, like Margaret Atwood touches on, and Vonnegut touches on, and then there's the kind of arcane bit that the sci-fi people like, and then there's this stupid sci-fi, and I like it all. Like I kind of I got a really high threshold for even bad sci-fi, but I can tell the good from the bad, I think. So I'm going to recommend.
There's only one way to figure that out. So okay, yeah.
So in recent times, I've gone back to this. I read it ages ago. Arrival by Ted Chiang.
Yeah.
Which is it was originally published as the story, or the film Arrival is
the story of our lives. No, it's
I
have it as well.
So this was originally published as the story of our lives and others, and it's a bunch of stories. And Ted Chiang is a guy who I think worked as a technical writer for a very long time, and would spend 2 or 3 years working on one story. So all of his stories are like they're not even quite novella length. They're like 50, 60 pages. And they tend to have a really high concept idea. Like there's a story in this called Hell is the Absence of God. And the idea in that story is that the people in that book live in a world where celestial events happen all the time. The angel Gabriel appears. When people die, you see them go up to heaven or go to hell. So that's a kind of funny idea, but he works everything through so meticulously that, and beautifully and humanly, that he's the person I always recommend to people who think they don't like sci-fi and fantasy, because it's just so beautifully worked out thematically, the metaphors that these things stand for, and on the other end, like I like China Miéville, for example, but in China Miéville's short stories, no offense if China is watching, but he'll set up the amazing setup, and then you can see him get bored and end the story. It just kind of ends sometimes a little bit unsatisfactorily, right? Even though I still enjoy them.
No, I'm with you on this. I think I read, after I read The City in the City, I bought one of his collections of short stories, and I got bored halfway through. It felt like he was bored writing them as well. Sorry, China, that's the last chance we're going to get him on.
Whereas this, everything is thought through, everything is worked out. The story that Arrival is based on, if anyone's seen Arrival, it's a really good film. But the story it's based on is one of the most beautiful sci-fi stories I've ever read. It makes you have to think quite hard as you're reading it, and then the payoff is kind of beautiful, and there's a twist which you kind of, but it's a beautiful twist. So I go back to him a lot. The other, I really like Octavia Butler, and I only discovered her in the last few years, and I've been this is Bloodchild and Other Stories, and she's an amazing, up until recently, quite underrated. She's for a long time she was the only African American woman writing sci-fi that anyone like that, as far as anyone can tell. Like there's a lot more now, and her stuff is like this is a great primer of her stuff if you can find it. And it's like she's got a great story called I have to check, sorry, just one moment.
Take your time.
Speech Sounds, which I can't believe hasn't been made into a TV show. And it's speech sounds is a word for everyone can't speak, and it's done really, really realistically. Like, and people have different levels of ability to communicate, but no one can say words anymore. And she just works it into this really interesting little story. She has a book that I think has been for ages being made into a film, but has to be made soon, called Kindred, which she wrote in the 70s. And it's about an African American writer who she gets transported for no reason, you can tell, sporadically from the 70s to plantation slavery era. And it's just an amazing epic novel about slavery. Another epic novel that's quite, I use epic when I think it's like huge concepts, but it's not actually that long. So my notion of an epic novel is usually about 200 pages, but I thought of that.
That's fine. I wonder about people, and I meet them all the time, who say, no, I definitely don't like science fiction. I've never, and then you kind of go, but have you read this guy, this person, and this woman, and have you ever read any of Ian Banks, or have you ever?
Yeah.
And I think I fear this is a conversation we could do an entire episode of this solely based on science fiction. I'm reading maybe I mentioned this to you earlier, the new Stephen, not the new one, but the most recent.
You mentioned
Baxter trilogy. So for those people who haven't read Stephen Baxter, and I hadn't, he's been around for a really long time, but he's got a new trilogy out called World Engines. And again, it's 600 pages long, and I lashed through it because it is the most amazing fun. Fun is not something you rarely say about 600-page SF novels. It's set in the, it's one of those Demolition Man things where you've got somebody who's from the present, is reawoken in the future because they need him for a reason. But it says huge amounts of things about where we are now, about what our problems are as a species. And he's kind of a Buck Rogers type who's in the middle of all of this. So there's a huge amount of fun to be had. The second book has just come out, and I have that downstairs as well. So again, if people are in any way interested in a nice big chunky read, Stephen Baxter might be the way to go. Sorry, interrupting. Your next.
No, I'm interested in the interruption. Like the sci-fi thing is fascinating to me because I've been writing fiction, and I've been trying to write for the last few years. I've been trying to learn how to write short stories, and I've kind of realized I just can't do realist literary fiction because I was meeting my friend Ronan Kelly, who's a really good writer, and he's starting to publish stories now, and he's really into kind of classically, beautifully wrought literary fiction. And I get like 2 pages into writing something like that, and I go, I need to add a robot or a ghost. Because I feel like maybe it's because I do so much journalism that where you're reporting on reality. I feel like if I'm going to invent a reality, I'm going to hyper realize it. I'm going to,
Yeah.
because I like nonfiction. I've just written a book in nonfiction. So that'll be how I deal with realism is nonfiction. But when it comes to fiction,
no, I fear I'm like you as well. I have written one story for a collection that's coming out this year. It's a collection all based around climate change, and all I could do, I tried writing reality, I didn't get me anywhere. All I could do is I ended up writing something set on the cusp of an apocalypse, literally where the world is about to end in 3 hours. And that was that's that story. People will decide for themselves whether or not that's terrible or worse than terrible. That's up.
Sounds great to me. I love my apocalypses.
What else have you got for us then? Go for it.
So I'll give you the last kind of fantasy thing I've read. So John Crowley, Little Big, which I had read. I read an anthology of sci-fi short stories, and I read one whose name the name is going to escape me by John Crowley that I really liked, and I went on to Twitter and I said, "Has anyone heard of John Crowley? Because this story is amazing." And I think it was Aoife Martin on Twitter came back and said, "Little Big, you have to read Little Big." Mm-hmm. And Little Big is like this going against type. This is quite a thick book, and it's a beautifully written, amazingly odd story about a young man going to marry into this family that clearly in this bizarre house that has loads of fronts to it because it was originally designed by their great grandfather architect to show housing styles. But then you realize there's more to it than just all these fronts, that it's also kind of a weird gateway to the other world. And there's loads, the family have these weird connections to the fairyland. And it's poetic and beautifully written. And so great. And like you can get it in these like fantasy. I'm also a sucker for these like imprints that say fantasy masterwork. And like I know like this is a genuinely good one, but I know like half the time I buy those that by any standards it's like awful. But because there's like elves or ghosts or robots, I tend to roll with it.
It's like that anytime I end up going into chapters, that giant table that has the yellow, the masterworks, the science fiction, I think the Gallant masterworks.
Gallants, yeah.
Ones with the yellow covers on them. I'm just yet that. I'll get to them eventually. They'll be amazing. Hey, let me do a couple of comments there, because there's loads of them that are all hanging around. Niall just says, I enjoyed reading the book so much, I've now moved on to the Audible version. Patrick takes pride of place lulling me to sleep this week. Last week it was Alan Partridge.
Okay, cool. That's amazing company. I love those Alan Partridge books.
From Leah Miller, it says, Patrick, for your writing through both Brexit and COVID, along with Lyric FM, that has all been soul bolstering for me. Thank you, Leah. If you want to drop some comments below, either in the book club or on YouTube, you can. Where are we? Have you got another pile to do, or what else are we doing with here?
So I'm kind of looking around myself.
If you're done, you're done. I'm not forcing you into going through the rest of your book.
I can't even remember what I. Oh yeah, like there's loads of great Irish books that I read this year. This is my wife Anna's book, which is brilliant. The Boldness of Betty.
Please get it closer to the screen, okay. So we can actually see in the middle.
It's really the screen is. So this is for young adults, but it's for anyone really, and it's a beautiful book about the 1913 lockout from the perspective of a kind of young teenage shop girl who gets involved with the struggle. It's actually kind of weirdly emotional when you think of current political struggles, because all of the same impetus is there, and Anna did loads and loads of research, so it's like properly historically true as well.
You would not have been able to have gone back into the kitchen if you'd forgotten that. Could you imagine what the rest of the evening would have been like?
But honestly, it's great. And then This Is Great, As You Were by Elaine Feeney. Yeah. I just find the cast of characters, the dialogue, it's just a sparkling book. Because my shelves are awful, I don't have some of the other books I want to talk about.
You asked me to pick you this one out, so Nisha Dolan.
Oh yeah, so I think that's probably my favorite new Irish novel, Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, about a young woman in Hong Kong in a kind of menage a trois kind of situation where she's kind of got one guy she's kind of in a relationship with, and then she meets this other woman that she really likes. And I kind of flew through it. Like she's compared to Sally Rooney a bit, which I think is unfair because I think her thing is very different. Like I felt like it was some sort of mixture of uh, kind of Jane Austen, early Martin Amis, and maybe Sue Townsend's Diary of Adrian Mole. Like there's a lot of really sharply written and funny. And yeah, it was kind of a joy to read. And then actually the other one I wanted to mention was A Ghost in the Throat by During the Grief, which is just a really original, beautiful book. Like it's terrible that the pandemic is putting a damper on all these launch parties because it's a great, as far as I can tell, it's a great year for Irish writing. There's a lot of, and that's probably something we can take solace in.
Yeah, I think what you've allowed me to do is both remind people that Nisha Dolan is a previous guest on Shelf Analysis as well. It's actually one of the most watched episodes we've had of the entire series was the one with Nisha. And this night, next week, at this time, I will be talking to Durin the Griefa. She's the guest next week, Wednesday night on Shelf Analysis. I'm to my eternal shame, I'm only 80 pages in. I only started reading it yesterday. It is beautiful. It is exquisitely written as a book. And I kind of resent having to sit here for 45 minutes and talk to you and not be reading it at the moment, if you want me to be honest with you.
That's okay. I'm used to disappointment.
Is that? Are you happy? Are we done with books now?
No, I want to talk about graphic novels briefly.
Oh, yes, sorry, graphic novels. Yes, very good.
So I think your previous guest Max Porter talked about finding it really easy to read graphic novels right now, yes. And I could kind of relate to that. So my reading's kind of lapsed recently, and I just go back and I reread stuff. And I grew up reading 2000 AD in the 80s when 2000 AD was really good. Like it was one of those things that was meant to be for kids, but it was just kind of slipping in all the subversive stuff written by people like Alan Moore and Pat Mills and stuff. And then I kind of moved on to kind of American superhero comics, which weren't the best, and then on to kind of brilliant kind of American alternative comics. And the one that's really stayed with me is Love and Rockets, which was an anthology.
There we go. Sorry, your Wi-Fi glitched for a moment. Go back about one sentence and then start again.
So American kind of indie comics.
Yeah, there we go. Good.
So, and I loved stuff like Daniel Clowes, who I once got to interview, which is amazing, and Peter Bagge used to do Hate. But the one that has the most emotional resonance and kind of demonstrates something unique in art that you can only do in a long-term serialized form is Love and Rockets by the Hernandez brothers. Mm-hmm. So they are Gilberto and Jaime Hernandez. They both do two different storylines that they kind of serialize in this anthology comic. They originally self-published, but then was taken up by Fantagraphics in the 80s, kind of before alternative comics were really a thing, and Gilberto's comics tend to be kind of set in a Latin American country, a fictional one. They're both Hispanic, and it's a fictional Latin American country, and it's beautifully weird, a lot of kind of magical realism in them. And then Jaime's, which I think they're fantastic, are set amongst the same group of people. It started out as like a punk rock scene with mainly female protagonists. And it's just been going, and the characters age with it. So the characters were young teenagers in the early 80s, and the characters are now middle-aged, older than me. And the best version, like this came out a few years ago, it's called The Love Bunglers, and what's fantastic about it is it's Jaime Hernandez going back to these same characters again, as he sporadically does. And this is a dark, beautiful story about two of the characters and their ongoing relationship, and kind of there's a history of abuse in one of their families, and that kind of comes through. But what's kind of fantastic is in the closing pages, there's a sequence of panels. And if you have been reading the comics assiduously for years, you'll notice that, so these 2 pages, they're silent panels, and sorry, I'm doing it the wrong way. And if you've been reading the comics for years, these are all the opposite perspective of things that happened in the comics 20, 30 years ago.
Mhm.
So if you read the comic, so say, like, just randomly, if you look at that shot, the person looking at the shot was pictured from the other perspective in a comic by Jamie 20 years ago. So it's like
That's an
rewarding
extremely long arc storyline you're dealing with there.
really long arc storyline. So it rewards kind of serial viewing of and paying close attention and caring about characters and watching them age. He's a beautiful draftsman, so there's something absolutely gorgeous in the way he's aging his characters, and they all age in different ways, the way we all age in different ways. And there's something that comics, again, in your Max Porter, when he talked about wanting to try and replicate, I don't know, like a fair dues to him, I don't know if it's possible to replicate what happens between the words and the panels in a comic. I don't know. Like, I don't know if you can do that in any other medium. So that's my tough sell on Love and Rockets in particular. And this one, maybe read a load of the early ones first. These
Yeah,
are kind of earlier
work
versions.
your way up from there. Yeah.
And work your way up.
What I love about this is I have a question for you just before we do the thing that we're going to do, because this is a special episode, obviously. But one of the best things about this program is that, you know, I can have Sinead Gleason over my shoulder reminding me to ask questions I should have asked, because she's a better interviewer than I am, I have to be honest. She says, I know Patrick's been writing essays alongside short stories for the last couple of years. So now that the essay collection is out, what about a short story collection?
I'm going to go back to them. Like I said, I kind of been going to kind of non-realist fantasy oddness, and I have written a number of stories kind of set in the same kind of universe and space. One of which was in Winter Papers, last year's Winter Papers, and I'm kind of feeling like I might go back to that world. I also feel like would like to do a book of reportage, because reporting is probably the kind of writing that is best for me. Like, as in, I go out and I meet people and I'm forced to think about other people's lives, and I think it informs everything else I do in a really positive way. So those are the two things that. Thanks, Sinead.
Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to temporarily take you out for a minute, and you're going to prepare yourself, and then I'm going to bring you back in. Okay, so you just you go do what you have to do, because I got a couple of things I need to say first of all before we finish it for here. First things first, we're not finished yet. There is a moment to come. I'm going to give you this first of all, which is thank you very much to our friends at Eason's. If you would like to buy a copy of Patrick's Okay, Let's Do Your Stupid Idea, there is currently 10% off at easons.com, and that's with the code Patrick10. It makes him sound like he is some sort of superhero. So Patrick10, if you fancy getting yourself a copy of Okay, Let's Do Your Stupid Idea by Patrick Freyne, there is 10% off at easons.com with the code Patrick10 at the moment as well. And of course, in store, it is one of our autumn must reads too. While the guys are setting up, and they are setting up, just a quick reminder that for the first time this week, and we'll have one next week for you as well, there is a bonus episode of Shelf Analysis. Why bonus episodes of Shelf Analysis? It's a bonus episode because everybody kept saying yes. And there are lots of people I just went, they'll never say yes. And they did. So over the course of the next few weeks, there are some extraordinary guests coming up on Shelf Analysis. We will have this coming Friday. So that's this Friday at 8 p.m. on the YouTube channel only. This is crucial. You can find it live on the YouTube channel at 8 p.m. I'm going to be talking to Robert Webb. That Robert Webb from Peep Show and from that Mitchell and Webb look, and who has already written one book of nonfiction about himself and about his life. And he has his new novel out since April, which is his first. So Robert Webb is our guest on Shelf Analysis. That is episode 42, and that's this coming Friday night at 8 o'clock on the YouTube channel only. And then back next Wednesday here for episode 43 of Shelf Analysis, which is with Darren Negrifa talking about a ghost in the throat. Now, let me press my other button. Let me see if I'm good. Let me see if I've got everything prepped. Let me go. So this button here first. There you go, that one there. And then it's this button here. And then 3, 2, 1, go. Are you guys happy? Are you ready there? You're okay?
Yeah, we're going to sing a song that I have a book in the essay called "To Sing a New Song to Drive Sorrows Away," which is based on, and we recorded some music. So we recorded this, which is an old folk song that we learned the Unthanks.
Becky
Unthank, and it gives the name to one of my essays. So we've recorded it, and now we're going to see if we. Earlier, when we tried this in the sound check, I knocked my computer off the table.
You did,
so
yeah.
We don't do that.
Anything can happen. You should point out this is you and Anna, your wife, as well, who's going to be doing backing vocals on this one as well. I'm going to take myself out of here. This is all yours. Go for it. Fire ahead.
Time passes over most pleasant and gay, since we learnt a new song to drive sorrows away. Sorrows away, sorrows away, sorrows away. Since we've learnt a new song to drive sorrows away. Although I'm not rich and although I'm not poor, I'm as happy as them the sky, thousands or more. Thousands or more. Thousands or more. Thousands or more. I'm as happy as them the sky, thousands or more. If you ask for my credit, you'll find I have none. With my bottle and friend, you will find me at home. Find me at home. Find me at home. Find me at home. With my bottle and friend, you will find me at home. As time passes over, most pleasant and gay, since I learned a new song to drive sorrows away. Sorrows away, sorrows away, sorrows away. Since we've learnt a new song to drive sorrows away.
Hang on, I gotta press another button to put me in here. Thank you. Oh, that's
thank you, Rick. I have to plug in my headphones because I can't hear anything.
Do plug yourself in first. That makes you only the second ever author to sing on Shelf Analysis after Sebastian Barry. So it's been a fantastic evening. Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Good stuff.
Thanks a million,
Patrick.
thanks for letting us sing.
I am glad I could give you some sort of small launch for tonight. This is for you, my friend. Cheers, and may everybody bless the book and all who sail in her.
Thank you, Rick, and thanks for doing these great Shelf Analyses shows. And thanks to everyone for tuning in.
And listen, thanks, Patrick Freyne. Good luck, man. Cheers. See you later.
Bye.
Chin chin. Don't forget, I'm going to remind you one more time, if you want to buy a copy of Patrick's Okay, Let's Do Your Stupid Idea, Easons have given us a 10% off voucher. Go to easons.com with the code Patrick10 and you get yourself a copy of Okay, Let's Do Your Stupid Idea. Or you can find it in all good bookstores nationwide as well. That's it from me. Shelf Analysis back with a bonus episode on Friday night at 8 o'clock on the YouTube channel only with Robert Webb. And then next Wednesday night with Darren Negrifa back live here in the Ricochet Book Club and there as well. Thanks a million for watching tonight. It's been fantastic. It's been really genuinely wonderful. And I'll see you Friday night at 8 o'clock with Robert Webb. Good luck.